that belief that your thoughts are giving you the truth has been breached. And now you really, in your gut, you start to realize these thoughts are not actually true. Now that makes it very easy to be able to detach. Until you have reached that state, and I'm not saying you specifically, but until anybody has reached that state, it's hard to detach from a stressful thought because you think it's real and you think it's going to get to you.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. V, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. And on today's podcast, we talk about a very important cell in the body that is pivotal to human performance and longevity. That is the stem cell. And you've probably heard so much about stem cells and their ability to help repair tissue, help be able to allow us to perform better and live longer. But yet there is just so much that's out there in the stem cell space, from cells coming from our marrow, cells coming from our fat, cells coming from umbilical tissue. Which ones do you use? Are there ways to improve our stem cell production and allow to really access and harness the stem cell so that we can live longer and perform better? All this on today's podcast. So welcome in. Before I introduce our guest, if this podcast is giving you value, if this is a place that you go to elevate your health and performance, and it's doing some good in your life, please do us a favor by helping this podcast grow. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast, engage with our comments, and then sharing this with your friends and family members because it really allows us to grow. If you are new to this podcast, welcome in. Every week I have an opportunity to present a guest, thought leaders in the worlds of longevity, epigenetics, human performance, human potential, all here for you to be able to walk away with some applicable tools to elevate your life. And as somebody who's coming into the podcast, if you would like some free materials to get your performance and longevity kickstarted, we would love to present you with this Thrive State bundle, this starter bundle that has breathwork exercises to increases levels of calm and energy in your body, an ebook to let you know just the power that you have within you to activate the next version of your life, all that and more by going to thrivestatestarter.com. If you haven't already, also pick up a copy of my book, Thrive State, #1 bestseller on prevention and in longevity. So definitely check it out. You could go to thrivestatebook.com or go to Amazon or wherever books are sold. And then finally, if you'd like to join a community of like-minded individuals that want to take their life to the next level, join our Thrive State community, learn about all our digital courses. You could find all that at mythrivestate.com. Now on to today's guest. He's someone I had a chance to meet at multiple different conferences. We've had a lot of time spent together, being on the same stages, speaking on similar topics, but from different angles. He's actually a neurophysiologist studying stem cells and actually an icon and pioneer on stem cells. His name is Kien Drapeau, and he's a researcher that focused on the discovery and development of things out in nature, natural plant extracts that actually stimulate our body to produce stem cells. Now, on today's podcast, he actually gives us Stem Cell 101, a complete primer for you to understand what stem cells are, what in the market is out there in terms of stem cells, and how do you start to activate your own stem cells, and how do you start to maybe even tap into the different treatment modalities that are available to you on the stem cell front. He's actually the first scientist to propose that stem cells are actually the repair system of the body. All of these findings are actually in his book, Cracking the Stem Cell Code. And you'll find in today's podcast, this guy is energetic. He is passion-filled because he really loves the material. He's someone that actually is the owner of 9 patents that demonstrate how certain plant extracts are actually used to boost stem cells. He has given over 300 scientific lectures on stem cells in 51 countries and is fluent in 3 languages. His most recent venture is one that is well known in the biohacking and longevity space, which is Stem Regen, where he's the founder and chief science officer. He has over 700,000 followers all over social media. You should definitely check it out. And you'll just find that he is really an authentic person with the passion and energy for us to live our best lives. So learn all about stem cells, and share this message with your friends and family members, and enjoy this podcast with Kien Vuu. All right, welcome back. Kien Vuu, welcome to the Thrive State podcast.
So fun to be here. We've met a number of times at various conferences, never had a chance to sit down and talk, so I'm really happy.
I'm really looking forward to this, Kien, and I can't wait to talk and dive deeper into stem cells, because I know this is something that is very confusing to so many different people. But before we do that, we do a portion on the show. It's called the 5 that Thrive. This is a very serious part of the show, game show style, 5 questions that is nearly life or death. And the thing is, if you win the 5 to Thrive, because we're at so many conferences, you will win a healthy meal on me. So the question to you, Kien Vuu, is, are you ready to play the 5 to Thrive?
I am.
Here we go. Question number 1 for 1,000 points is, what did you want to be when you grew up as a child?
You know what? 2 answers to that. When I was really young, I wanted to study everything because I thought one day we will need somebody who knows everything. Obviously naive and silly, but these are some of the early thoughts as a child. And in my early teens, I was fascinated by the mind. I really always wanted to be a neuroscientist, which is what I studied.
Neuroscientist is beautiful. Question number 2 is, the next time we're at our conference, say the Biohacking Conference, where we're in front of thousands of people, and I was hosting you and I handed you a microphone and said, Kien, you can't talk about science right now. You're going to sing a song. What song would you sing, my friend?
I would lose. I'm a terrible singer.
What would you do?
If I were to pick one, oh my goodness, this is so much not my world. John Lennon.
That's great. 2,000 points. That was a tricky one, but you still got it. Question number 3 is, during times where you're feeling most stressed, what type of biohack or practice is your favorite?
Honestly, it's to step back and just say, none of this is real. None of my experience of it now is real. Just take a deep breath and look at it for what it is, and it just falls apart.
That's great. And I would love to dive into that a little bit more in terms of that awareness and consciousness that you could just slip back into. It's 3,000 points. You're doing great. Question number 4 is, has there been a book, a phrase, a quote back in your early days where once you read it, heard it, or thought about this quote or phrase, that life just completely was different from you moving forward?
There's a few that comes to mind. Let's say the 2 that are the main ones would be, number 1, do when you're alone as if you were among people. So it keeps you to different types of commitment on doing what's right or what's appropriate or adequate. And the second one would probably be, joy is a choice.
Joy is a choice. I love that. And I think even as we're talking about stem cells today, that I feel the power of choice and making conscious choices is going to be pivotal in terms of our health and even affecting the health of our stem cells. Awesome. 4,000 points. Last question. Certainly, if you get this correct, you get a healthy meal on me the next time we are together. Is, if you had one superpower and you were a superhero, what superpower would that be?
It would be to stay at peace regardless of circumstances. And that's the one I'm working on anyway. But
that's an evolving practice for me. 5,000 points. Boom, you win the 5 to Thrive healthy meal on me. And I can't wait to dive more into this, because 3 of your answers really centered around our ability to truly be conscious. That if we are at a place and to quiet things down, we could recognize the world for what it is and what we can choose it to be versus what we're reacting to in terms of circumstance. And for me, this new look into consciousness as it pertains to our health and our longevity is something I'm going to dive into. But Kien, you are an icon and a pioneer in the stem cell world. First of all, before we dive into what stem cells are, how did you even get into this field of medicine?
I was at the Montreal Neurological Institute, so I was a neuroscientist, and then I was hired by a company. At the time, this company was selling a blue-green algae. You may know it, blue-green algae from Klamath Lake. Mm-hmm. And Deshay had just didn't pass, so we're in 1995, and the company needed to have scientific data to support the claims that they were making on their product. So I was hired to find the active compounds, mechanisms of actions, and document all the benefits of that plant. And as I'm studying it, I come across a lot of cases of people who reversed like significant condition touching the heart, the brain, the lung, the liver, the pancreas, the skin, the joints. So the mystery from a scientific standpoint was, how can one plant touch so many different aspects of human health? So for a number of years, we really had no explanation, not even a hypothesis, until I came across an article documenting stem cells going from the bone marrow to the brain and becoming a brain cell. So we're in 2001. That's the first article that I come across talking about this in a world neuroscience where we're told the brain cannot repair, and we're also told that stem cells can only become blood cells. So it was a breakthrough in my mind. So I dug a little bit in the scientific literature. I found the same observation with stem cells going to the heart and to the liver. So I simply thought, what if stem cells, how can a stem cell become heart, liver, and brain and not the rest? It had to be just a matter of time where scientists will document that stem cells can become everything in the body. And if that's the case, then they have to be the repair system of the body. So we published an article in the journal Medical Hypotheses suggesting stem cells are the repair system of the body. And in the back of my mind, what if the mechanism of action is that blue-green algae is a stem cell mobilizer? Just like you have plants stimulating the immune system, you have plants stimulating stem cell release. So we acquired a flow cytometer. We started to count stem cells of ourselves. Very quickly, we discovered that's what that plant was doing. At that point, I don't know anything about stem cells really. And that's really when I took a deep dive, and everything that I've done now for the past 23 years was in field of stem cells. So that's how I got into stem cells.
Oh, great. And I can't wait for people. We're very fortunate to have you as an expert kind of break this down, because in the world of biohacking now, we hear of so many treatment modalities that are out there and so many different types of stem cells. We hear the pluripotent stem cells from mesenchymal stem cells coming from other people's bodies, whatnot. And people are injecting stem cells. People are injecting stem cell lines, and also, secretory packs, within stem cells called exosomes. So for somebody who might be naive to the whole world of stem cells, what role do they play initially as that embryo is forming? And then what happens to these stem cells? And can we break down the important stem cell types that we know are important for tissue repair and regeneration?
Okay, it's a big question. Let's start by the last one, and again, we can get into other types of stem cells.
Yeah.
But stem cells from the bone marrow are indeed your repair system. When you have an injury, and to me, that's a fascinating part of science, because everybody listening, they've all had an injury in their life as a child. These injuries are all healed. They're gone. They no longer exist. So everybody has witnessed the fact that the body does heal. But isn't that interesting? I am sure in your training as a doctor, nowhere have you heard what is happening when the body heals. Now, when you have an infection or a cold, we know that the immune system kicks in and will take care of the cold. But a thing called the repair system has not been part of science until very recently, with all this development of stem cell research. So stem cells are simply the repair system of the body. These are your stem cells in your bone marrow. They leave the bone marrow, they go into tissue, they become tissue resident or tissue committed stem cells, and now they are the stem cells of that tissue taking care of repair of these tissues whenever there's a problem or an injury. That's the role of your stem cells in your body. Now you can boost this whole process by adding stem cells to it. You can use stem cells from the bone marrow, you can extract them, concentrate them, re-inject them from the bloodstream. It is done. What we do is that we use plants that will make you release your own stem cells from your bone marrow. So that's stem cells from the bone marrow. Stem cells, if I go back a little bit in what you were talking about, there's the embryo. These are embryonic stem cells that change very quickly as the embryo develops. They become fetal stem cells. And when you're born, these are adult stem cells. Even as a newborn, these are your stem cells in your bone marrow. There's also a bunch of stem cells that are left into your fat tissue, and they will early on be part of the development of all your fat cells and your fats all in your bodies. But it turns out that a bunch of them are remaining in your fat tissue as somewhat dormant stem cells for the entire life of an individual. So that's another source of stem cells that we can tap into, adipose-derived stem cells. Not as powerful as bone marrow stem cells, but pretty good. And because they're dormant, they're not as old as you are in terms of chronological age of your body. So they're a good source of stem cells. The other one that people may hear about are umbilical cord stem cells. These are the different lines of cells that you can have when they're cultivated, or when they're fresh, they're simply coming from an umbilical cord or a placenta. They're also great stem cells, great potential for regeneration because they're young, and young stem cells are better than older stem cells. The little caveat with umbilical cord stem cells for doctors who choose not to use umbilical cord stem cells is that you can have sometimes pathogens that are with it at times. I'm not saying it's a big problem, but it is probably the most commonly reported side effect if there is a problem. The other one, it happens that it's not 100% stem cells. You can have like cellular debris of placenta or umbilical cords, and that could trigger some form of rejection or autoimmune issue. And the other one is that these cells can have a genetic mutation, not even mutation, genetic material that may not work well for you. And that was revealed as it went from a risk to a reality about 2 months ago when a paper was published in the scientific literature where a group inserted human genes that triggers Alzheimer's in mice. So these mice developed Alzheimer's, and when they took stem cells from these animals, implanted them into a recipient mouse, that mouse developed Alzheimer's as well. So now there's some data supporting that genes sometimes can be transferred. All of this being said, it has not materialized yet in the scientific literature. Overall, in the big picture, umbilical cord stem cells are safe as well. And the latest one that people can hear about are V cells, very small embryonic-like stem cells. They are really the potent part of what was, or was still is, PRP. When you isolate platelets or platelet-rich plasma, when you isolate platelets, they're in this population of platelets, you have a population of small stem cells because platelets don't have DNA. So if you dye for DNA and you use marker for stem cells, you will see that there are stem cells in that fraction, and they are extremely potent. They're the most potent stem cells in the human body. So these are like the different types of stem cells that are available to people if they go in the marketplace to seek for stem cells.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about the mechanism of action for these stem cells. We understand fetal stem cells eventually differentiate into different types of tissue. The stem cells that are mentioned today that's out in the marketplace, is it thought that they are actually providing transformation into the tissue that's being damaged? Or do they act in what's called the paracrine effect, where they actually have repair mechanisms within them that basically is repairing the area, not necessarily happening? Or are all these things happening together that's orchestrated by the stem cell?
It's all of it together, and to a varying degree, depending on the tissue. So here's an example. Years ago, as we were working with plants to study plants that were documented to trigger the release of stem cells from the bone marrow, and we wanted to see what would be the impact of consuming these plants on muscle repair. So we used a mouse model in which we injected cardiotoxin in the gastrocnemius muscle. So basically the leg is paralyzed within a day or two after that injection. And then we feed these animals. So before, we irradiated the animal and injected fluorescent stem cells. And the purpose here is that if these stem cells now migrate in that dead muscle and regenerate the muscle, we can easily see them just by shedding a light on the muscle, and the muscle glows. And after 6 weeks, the entire muscle is reconstituted, but it is entirely green. So Here's an example of a repair that is entirely driven by stem cells. You will see something like this in the skin, in the liver, and a number of tissues. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the brain and the heart, where you will have repair. You release stem cells from the bone marrow, you can have significant repair, both in the brain and in the heart. But if you shed a light on the heart, you will see very few stem cells that have actually migrated in the heart compared to the number of new heart cells that you have in the area that was damaged. And that is the paracrine effect. So these stem cells migrate in the heart, migrate in the brain, they release growth factors that activates the resident stem cells of these tissues. And then the rest of the body is also a mix between these two extremes.
I think that's very helpful for people to start to understand that it's not just one or the other, it's the entire repair process. And it's different for differing tissues and probably different from differing type of stem cells that you are using. The next question we have is really on the age of stem cells. We mentioned there are exogenous stem cells where you're actually using stem cells that are not yours. Is there any safety and efficacy to doing something like that? And is that more advantageous to use a cell line that is younger? And what exactly, or actually maybe before you answer that question, is what exactly happens to the cells in the marrow as we age? Do we lose them? Do we have a fixed amount? Do they regenerate in the marrow? And are the stem cells of a 5-year-old going to be same as a stem cell in a 90-year-old?
Okay, so you're born with red marrow in all your bones. The red marrow very quickly in your life starts to shrink and convert into what is called fatty marrow, yellow marrow. That yellow marrow does not make stem cells. That conversion, you've lost about 50% of your red marrow by age 15 and about 90% by age 30. And it keeps going down. The red marrow that you have keeps being producing in the same way. So you will not exhaust stem cells from your bone marrow. So your stem cells in your bone marrow have telomerase. They will regenerate, reproduce, create telomeres, elongate telomeres, and maintain them. So these stem cells are immortal in your bone marrow. Telomerase starts to disappear from the cell the moment it leaves the bone marrow and gets into a tissue. And then now it gets into the cycle of cellular division. And when you're at the end of the telomere, now you have a senescent cell. But in the bone marrow, those cells are somewhat immortal, but they keep shrinking during your entire life. So you don't run out of stem cells, but you do have less and less. And we may have a chance to talk about this in this whole discussion, but I believe, and I published this 10 years ago, and now a lot of the data has accumulated on this, but I believe that shrinking is probably the most fundamental cause of aging and disease formation. You just don't have the full ability to repair that you used to have when you were 15, 20, 25, and 30. There's a point not having this, things start to slowly fall apart in the body, and they can't fully repair just because you don't have enough stem cells. In addition to the decrease in the number of stem cells in your bone marrow and the number of stem cells in circulation, there's the age of these stem cells. So if you take, let's say, an 8-month-old mouse, which is not a terribly old mouse, but it's like middle age, past middle age, and then you trigger an injury, and then you inject in that animal stem cells isolated from a 1-day-old mouse, or stem cells isolated from a 14-month-old mouse, which is a geriatric mouse, the repair will be very different. Young stem cells are much more effective than older stem cells, which has led to a general view right now. I've heard this so many times on YouTubes, and Tony Robbins was mentioning this. Like, when you're past 40 years old, your stem cells are worthless. Like, they fall down the cliff and they're worthless. Therefore, you need to go and get umbilical cord stem cells. I can tell you right now, we are doing studies with a blend of herbal extract that triggered the release of your own stem cells. And in an ongoing study right now with stable chronic congestive heart failure, people are between, in that study, 66 and 74 years old. And all the patients in the study right now, after 6 months, have normal heart function. Their stem cells are supposed to be worthless. And that's really the point. They're not as effective as when they were young, but they're still plenty effective to do a lot of repair. Because if you release your own, you can do this consistently every day over long periods of time. And the cumulative effect of a reduced capacity to repair by older stem cells nevertheless adds up to something that is very significant. And somewhere this message is also coming from the fact, and I don't want to get into anything here that is conspiracy, but it's just good common sense of how medicine oftentimes develops. Medicine is a profitable industry. It's a business. So right now, there's the most regenerative, the most amazing discovery in the world of medicine is probably stem cell. Historically, it's among the top, and in our lifetime, it's probably going to be the most important discovery. Everybody wants to capture a piece of it. And so there's some people who develop cell lines, and they'll tell you these cell lines are the best because they're pure, they're like full of qualifications. Bottom line, there's no stem cells that are better than the fresh stem cells coming from your own body, your own bone marrow, your own fat cells. Umbilical cord stem cells are also good, but it's not true that your own are not good enough. Did that capture what you were looking for?
I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you are, I just wanted to let you know, join our community. There's so many free resources and a great community of people that desire health, happiness, human potential, to have more in their life, more health, more energy. And when you have those two things together, you could create more happiness, more abundance, whether it be financial, romantic, all these things in your life. And if you're just starting out, you don't know where to go, just sign up for thrivestatestarter.com, because in there you're going to get a bundle of information that includes a longevity ebook, a longevity and performance resource guide, lecture notes that come from my keynotes at Google, at Fortune 500 companies, all the insights in that keynote in lecture slide form given to you. And then finally, breathwork. I share 3 powerful breathwork exercises to access calm, which really gives you clarity and peace during the day, to access energy if you need to wake up and really motivate yourself, and finally a breathwork routine that you could do every single morning so that you could be very intentional with how you create that day. You could find all this stuff delivered free to your inbox at thrivestatestarter.com. And our community is growing. If you want to be a part of a community of people that desire the Thrive State, that are really in Thrive State themselves, and help other people along with that, you could be a part of the community. You can get group coaching from me. We do breathwork sessions, meditation sessions, and you also get to drop in and participate in podcasts in the future. You could find more about the community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. So check out those resources. You're not going to be disappointed, and please enjoy the remainder of this podcast.
Yes, I think that's great. And one of the things that I know my listeners are very attuned to is they're getting a lot of marketing now to leave the country to places like Mexico and Costa Rica and Puerto Rico, for example, to get these exogenous stem cells that seemingly, a lot of celebrities are going to get done now, versus people that still offer bone marrow type of extraction and giving back to the patient here in the States. What do we now? What do we know? Do we know that there is one that's better than the other? And how does somebody, without going into the supplement world at this point, discern what are the best modalities of stem cells are good for them, and should they be leaving the country to get these treatments?
You probably ask this question to 10 people, you'll get then 10 different answers. Let me try to make it as objective as possible. There's 2 things that we have to recognize. A doctor that uses umbilical cord stem cells will make more profit and will have less trouble than if they go and they extract stem cells from your body. This is just a reality. I know practitioners who are going to umbilical cord stem cells just because it's so much easier and they make better profit on the treatment that they provide. So we cannot just put aside the fact that's it's a big deciding factor. If we put that aside, umbilical cord stem cells are younger and have more regenerative power, no question about it. But they could come with risks. We briefly talked about this, and I've come across some people who have had those kinds of systemic infection that I didn't come across people who have had a risk or a problem coming from some sort of genetic predisposition in these stem cells, but studies have raised that risk. But I did come across people who said, there's no way, it's not true that there's no way to tell. Nobody did enough investigation to tell. But within 3 to 6 months after the umbilical cord stem cell injection, they developed leukemia. There's no way today to tell if it's tied to it. There's no way to tell. You would have to really do a research and dig into it, but these things are there. So for me, I would probably go with bone marrow stem cells and fat-derived stem cells, and also V cells. V cells are the most potent stem cells, more potent than umbilical cord stem cells in terms of repair. So to be able to extract these stem cells, concentrate them, activate them, and re-injecting them, that is probably right now, it's one of the fastest growing area, if you want, of using stem cells. It is V cells. These are all safe. I'm not saying that umbilical cord stem cells are not safe. If you want to do them in other countries, make sure you do the research to find one that is really doing the work right. And there are many of them. So I will just say, pay the price to make sure that you have one where a lot of testing is done on these umbilical cord stem cells. There's no pathogens and they are fresh. And if you do that, it's a good approach. I'm not saying it's not a good approach. The approach that I'm doing is that I have come across plants, I have documented plants that trigger the release of your own stem cells. So in my world, I won't say it's the best approach, but in my world, it just checks a lot of the boxes. They're your own. You can do this every day for long periods of time. You take 2 capsules of this product, you release 10 million of your own stem cells. You do this 3 times a day, you've released 30 million of your own stem cells. Do this every day for a month. You've released 1 billion of your own stem cells. Do this for 6 months. You've released 6 billion of your own stem cells at a fraction of the cost. And you do this in a way that is physiological. It is cumulative in the body because it's the way that the body is actually designed to repair. So we're developing all the science for that, but that's the other modality of tapping into stem cells that we can add to this whole spectrum of stem cells.
And again, what is the name of the plant again? And what is the active chemical that allows the release of these stem cells? And as you said before, they don't exhaust after they get pumped out of the marrow?
They don't. Your bone marrow, there's different ways of looking at this, but your bone marrow has a strong homeostasis. And probably one of the easy way to answer it is that in the bone marrow, you have what is called asymmetrical cellular division, different from everywhere else in biology, where one mother cell becomes 2 identical daughter cells. In the bone marrow, the original DNA goes into one daughter cell that stays in the bone marrow, and the copies goes into the other cell, and then that's the stem cell that is released. So when you release 1 million stem cells, you don't lack 1 million stem cells in your bone marrow. So your bone marrow is a really strong homeostasis to just keep itself. So it doesn't change over time because you release more of it. And your first question was?
Yeah,
the plants. So, the first one we identified was the blue-green algae from Klamath Lake. This is how we discovered this whole process, this whole phenomenon. It's not the most effective plant. So after discovering AFA, this blue-green algae, my question was, what else in the world has been associated to a broad variety of benefits? And let's go and test them and see which one have an effect on stem cells. And we find sea buckthornberry from the Tibetan plateau, Allomacroclada from Madagascar, Ficoidan coming from seaweeds, coming from Patagonia, from Newfoundland, from Tasmania, Notoginseng coming from China. And the mechanism of action is slightly different for all these different plants. So blue-green algae has an L-selecting blocker, so it basically reduces the adhesion of stem cells in the bone marrow. You get from sea buckthornberry and from Notoginseng, you get compounds. So Notoginseng is saponins. In sea buckthornberry, it's polyphenols or flavones. And these compounds, these products seems to act by triggering what I would consider like an injury mimicking response in the body. Just like you have like autophagy mimicking response, fasting mimicking response, you have injury mimicking response. So you can quantify in the bloodstream the compounds that the body would normally release when it has an injury. And then it triggers the release of stem cells, and the number of stem cells in the bloodstream increases. So these are, like, generally speaking, the 2 broad way in which these products trigger stem cell release.
Now, those are natural ways of causing stem cell release. So let's talk a little bit about lifestyle factors that are the things that we do. In my work, I'm really studying our consciousness, what we choose to do in terms of what we put in our bodies, whether or not we move, certain biohacks that are free, time-restricted feeding to activate autophagy. And then we do have biohacks that are like ozone therapy or hyperbarics. What have you found that has good concrete evidence that actually causes release or the production or preserve the health of our stem cells moving forward?
Right now, in terms of release, not a lot has been documented aside from the plants that I described. For releasing stem cells, very intense physical activity will increase the number of stem cells in circulation. But it's very short-lived. Like, it's a day, the day of your injury, and after that it goes down. It's probably an injury response to release stem cells to go be able to repair what you have damaged. So how much of that can help for longevity? I don't know, because the stem cells you release, they go to repair something. At the end of the day, when we really look overall at the health of athletes years after spending a lot of time training intensely, I'm not sure that it really contributes to longevity. And other than this, to release stem cells, fasting for more than 3 days will significantly increase the number of stem cells in circulation, and hyperbaric chamber will also do the same thing. These are the technologies that I know can put more stem cells in circulation. If now we want to potentiate or leverage the stem cells that have been released, things like pulse electromagnetic frequencies has been documented to really help circulation of stem cells, migration of stem cells in tissue, but more than anything else, the differentiation of stem cells into, so far what has been documented is anything that pertains to joint, ligament, tendons, bone cells. So all of the stem cells can be stimulated to transform into those tissues. So you release stem cells or you get a stem cell injection, and then you can apply pulse electromagnetic frequencies to joints if you want to help these joints. Of things not to do, I would say smoking suppresses the role of stem cells in the body. Alcohol suppresses the work of stem cells in the body. Stress suppresses the role of stem cells in the body. I came across that the first time more than 10 years ago. It was clear to me. It was at the time that this whole understanding that stem cells are the repair system of the body, and that we develop diseases because of that decline in the number of stem cells in circulation, it became a fascinating story to me to realize that stress has been associated with virtually every single degenerative disease that we know of. There's a stress component or an anxiety component to it. I remember a book that I came across when I was in my teens, and it was a book about neuropsychology. And it was a field that I told you that neuroscience was an interest for me when I was fairly young. And I remember reading about this, and these books were talking about how the mind was associated with so many different diseases. And later on with stem cells, we discovered that when you are stressed, when you are under a level of anxiety, it suppresses your stem cells in their ability to migrate into a tissue and proliferate in that tissue. So that means your ability to repair is suppressed. So I'm not saying it's the sole reason, because I'm sure it's not, but one of the fundamental reasons why stress is associated with a broad variety of diseases and problems, it's probably because it suppresses the role of stem cells in the body. And in today's world, we know kids, starting from teenage kids, even younger, who are expressed to stress for decades. So for decades, our ability to repair is suppressed. So for me, one of the greatest acts for longevity or to prevent the development of a lot of these problems is really just develop a practice, a way for you to just snap out of any kind of stressful situation and realize that none of that stress is needed. None of that stress bring anything to the situation, and none of the things that you're stressing about are really real in the way that you are stressing about them. I'm not saying they're not a situation that needs to be handled, but they can be handled more effectively without that stress. That's probably one of the biggest hacks for optimal health.
That is such a beautiful realization, because I'm finding in my work the role of spirituality and consciousness is playing in our health and disease. And if we look at it, the field of epigenetics tells us this, that our cells are not dynamic. The way our genes are expressed are not dynamic, that the genes, the DNA is constantly listening to the energetic cues around that cell to determine which genes to turn on, which genes to turn off. And given the situation or circumstance, the cell will respond. And there are basically two main states that I find cells to be, and certainly everything in the middle. But on one side, you basically have danger signal sent to the cells of your body. And you can imagine what happened back in the Paleolithic days when there was a saber-toothed tiger or a neighboring village about to attack, is like your body has to rev up for that danger. So all the body's resources, all the ATP, everything has to prepare for the danger. And what we found in psychoneuroimmunology is that perceived stress response increases inflammation in our body, and it drops our immune system just to fight off for that potential danger. So imagine diverting all of your body's energy towards that. And that ultimately leads to disease. Now, on the other side of the spectrum is the state where our cells feel like they're safe, that they're protected, and they could just do what they do best, which is just live life and have the innate intelligence of the body do the healing. That's what I find that the stem cells are actively working and being released. And there are these two states, which is why when you mention the role of spirituality, of being able to handle the stress and understanding that really what you're doing is you're working on massaging the muscle of putting your body into this thrive state and not habitually thinking that there's actually real danger that's there. So can you speak to that, number one? And then two, what have been some of the ways that, yes, there's that deep breath out, but how have you started to work into this practice of being conscious and being more in control of your energetic state?
So let's start with the first one. So remind me what it was. Okay, yeah. In response to your first question, I think there's something that is really interesting to talk about, but it's not true that there's no science. There's science behind it, but many links in a long chain, and overall the phenomenon has not been demonstrated scientifically. But the bits and pieces of it have, which is the fact that you need norepinephrine, noradrenaline, to release stem cells. So if you inject in an animal a blocker of noradrenaline, and then you inject molecules that are triggering the release of stem cells, you will not mobilize stem cells. So there is a neurotransmitter from your nervous system essential for the process of releasing stem cells. I find this fascinating. Now, you have also every single stem cells as receptors for all the main neurotransmitters released by the brain or in the brain. You also have nerve terminals everywhere in your microvasculature. The entire anatomical machinery and physiological processes are there to say, I could, with my brain, release stem cells and guide them where I want them to go. And I'm thinking about this because I remember I was in Montreal, I was a teen, and I was fascinated by the story of somebody in Montreal who had a spinal cord injury. He dove in a pool and he completely sectioned his spinal cord. And within a 2-3 years period, he was normal, not paralyzed, walking normally. And what he was saying is that what he did is that every day of his life, he spent all the free time that he had to visualize these pieces of light going to his spinal cord and repair. Now, you will not materialize your new spinal cord out of thin air, but so you need a physiological process that is underlying all of this. And now with this look on stem cells, I'm thinking maybe there's a way of actually tapping into this whole repair process by stepping out of this fear mode and getting into more of this mode of peace and then guiding this luminous process in the body. So to me, I think there's a real connection between the work of the mind and really the ability of the body to repair. And it connects into your other question. So for me, if I answer your question, because I'm a scientist, but there's this other aspect of my life that I don't really oftentimes talk about, but it's probably the biggest part of my life, which is all those aspects that is more, let's say, spiritual. I think that the ability to step out of the situations depends on a number of things. The first one, the primordial one, is to look back. And if I ask you the question, what were you thinking at 10 a.m. last Friday? You can't answer. I don't. Yep. And actually, you can answer this question of every hour since the day you're born. And yet, during all that time, you are not stopping to think. You always think things that are actually irrelevant for the most part. And I can summarize all of that by Mark Twain quote, and I'm paraphrasing here. You may not have said it exactly in those words, but I've spent my life resolving problems that fortunately never happened. Okay? So when you sit back and you really look at this, and another question could be also, of all the thoughts that you have in your brain, which one do you choose? And actually the answer is none of them. Because if I were to say, if you choose them, stop choosing them and stop thinking, and you'll realize that these thoughts are nonstop. So when you sit back and you realize there's a constant flow of thoughts that take up my entire presence in my life, in my entire life, they occupy the front stage of my presence in this world, and they are worthless because they don't matter. It's a dramatic conclusion. But my point is that when you start, and then you stop, you meditate, and you catch every single one of these thoughts, and you look at it, and you see what is the root of that thought. And there's a point, if you reach that point, it's a revelation. You realize that fear is the root cause of every single thought process. If you did not have fear, you would stop thinking, because all your thoughts are protecting you from something that is imaginary for the most part. So now you take a distance from all of this and you realize none of my thoughts actually are real. None of them. There's not one thought that is true. The only thought that is true is me stopping to think and being there with the oneness that is there. That's the only true thought. So it becomes easier and easier to drop the thoughts that are stressful because they're not real. So the answer to your question is to reach that place where that belief that your thoughts are giving you the truth has been breached. And now you really, in your gut, you start to realize these thoughts are not actually true. Now that makes it very easy to be able to detach. Until you have reached that state, and I'm not saying you specifically, but until anybody has reached that state, it's hard to detach from a stressful thought because you think it's real and you think it's going to get to you.
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful inner work that I think people are really starting to talk about. And I really do appreciate you mentioning this. And as much as this is potentially a topic that has been woo out there, I think we're starting to develop the scientific rigor to understand how these potential states and this consciousness actually leads to biological responses in our body, and more on the forefront of that. And I really do think that is going to be the next wave in biohacking for longevity and human performance. This has been a very enlightening conversation. I think anyone who's walking away from here who's going to walk out with so much value. But how do people find out more about you, about STEM, and to get maybe some product for themselves to try on for themselves as well?
You go at stemregen.co, stemregen.co, and then you can get all the information on the products, many blogs, many articles to explain all of that. But the sort of ongoing discussions and answering questions about the product and other aspects of health, I have both on TikTok and Instagram, Stem Cell Christian. And then if anybody has a question, post it, and I'll be able to. It'll be a pleasure to respond to it.
Christian, such a enlightening conversation. I thank you for your time. The last question I have for you is, you're in the world of spirituality. You have been a neuroscientist. You've seen so many different type of modalities that are out there. But in your mind, what has been your best medicine?
If I put aside meditation and all this sort of for lack of better term, I'll say control of the mind, because it's not really control as much as like letting go of the mind. If I put that aside, I would say what has had the most impact on me, I will name two. Cold plunge. I think it's probably the cheapest way of achieving the most in the body, and more expensive, but pulse electromagnetic frequencies for me in my life has been like an amazing modality.
Christian, I thank you for your time, for your wisdom, and for your energy and passion for doing the work that you do. Thank you for being on the Thrive State podcast.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if you're finding that this content is really helping you and your family members, please consider supporting our mission and our cause of elevating health, happiness, and human potential for people all over the world. You can do so by making sure that you subscribe to this podcast, sharing it with your friends and family members, and leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. All these things are going to really help elevate the show and to give us the resources to continue to bring more content just like this to yourself as well as the people that you love. If you haven't already, you might want to consider joining our community. We actually have a community where people get to engage with me in group sessions where we do breathwork, meditation, where we do challenges together, really to be able to get us access to health, happiness, human potential, so that we could have longevity and performance in our life as well. You can check out our community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. And if you haven't already, pick up a copy of my book, Thrive State. It really gives you all the tools, the pillars that you need to create a blueprint to control the energetics of your life. Who are you? How you show up in the world? The choices that you consistently make create an energy in your body, and you can control this. And when you can control that, you also control the messages you give to your DNA that gives you access, again, to optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. And let me also just share a free gift to you. If you haven't already, please pick up my longevity and performance bundle where I share lecture notes, ebooks, breathwork exercises, and longevity and performance resources at thrivestatestarter.com. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. Thank you for helping us grow. Remember always, my friends, that you are your best medicine.